Thank you very much for being here. I'm so honored to have my talk at the Aga Khan program and having many of my friends here. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you, David. So today I'm going to talk about the Madrasa in Iran and Baghdad under the Saljuqs. Madrasa, an Arabic word taken from Darasa, means a place where lessons or dars are taught. Today, madrasa are intended for children before they go to university and include schools where multiple kinds of lessons are taught. Medieval schools dedicated to religious studies were called madrasa. They share then similarities with the scholastic schools of medieval Europe and its main figure, Thomas Aquinas. The establishment of madrasa in medieval Islam began in the mid-11th century with the dominance of the Saljuqs in Iran and Baghdad, where the Abbasids were originally stationed. By providing a brief introduction to transformation in educational institutions from pre-Islamic Iran to the early 11th century, this study intends to examine the functions and structures of several types of madrasa in Iran and Baghdad under the Saljuqs. There were two main centers of education in pre-Islamic Iran. The first was Agora, an open place of assembly in the city where military techniques and religious studies were taught. Agora is actually a Greek word meaning an open place of assembly that was designated area in the city where freeborn citizens could gather to hear civic announcement, muster for military campaigns, or discuss politics. It was dependent on so-called fireplaces, that is atashkade, and was conducted by Zoroastrian priests. The second was Gondishapur, that is built by Sassanids to educate princes and nobles. The most prominent was the Academy of Gondishapur, located in southwestern Iran. In the village of Shahabad near Shushtar. Gondi Shapur in Pahlavi, that is Vahandi Shapur, means Shapur city is better than Antakya, and was built by Shapur the first. In this academy of learning was an intellectual center of philosophy, theology, and science under the Sassanid Empire. Adjacent to a big hospital, it offered training in medicine during the 6th and 7th century, especially under Anushirvan. Historians such as Ibn Hoqal, Yaqut Hamavi, Ibn Asir, and Ibn Khaldun pointed to the vast educational programs of Gondi Shapur and their continuity in time. Unfortunately, nothing specific has remained of the Academy of Gondi Shapur, nor do any sources refer to the functional and structural architecture of this educational center. Scholars such as Dr. Sami Azar, in his book, The History of Development of Schools in Iran, however, hypothesized that the architecture of the Academy of Gondi Shapur must be similar to the palace of Bishapur built of Shapur the first. So as you see in this palace, there are Gombat Khane, chamber dome, and also the courtyard. In the Bishapur palace, the central space is a square courtyard covered by a dome chamber that is called Gombat Khane, and it's surrounded by side rooms. Access to these side rooms is possible from the central space or Gombat Khane. Other spaces are arranged relative to the Gombat Khane. The space is surrounded by two symmetrical ivan, one of which is connected to the entrance. Okay. The second feature is the use of two types of spaces in the plan. First, there are long Ivans and long walls called Taqahang, and second, there is a square chamber with a dome that is Gombat Khane. Unlike Ivans, which were intended to link spaces and passages, that is Dalan, Gombat Khane were discrete and independent spaces intended for specific function. The structure of Gombat Khane was capable of holding educational functions. Later, these features, as well as philosophical and scientific achievements, were passed to Islamic educational centers, including the Madrasa. So these Gombat Khane had uses for education, and especially later during Islam, it was used for having masjid, madrasa that we will talk about, and also madrasa. Islam rose in Arabian society, which was largely based on nomadic way of life. For that reason, they did not need developed social edifices, including educational centers. However, the rise of Islam meant fundamental changes in education system of this region. Arabia, where education was based on oral tradition, became a center for the teaching of the Quran, the holy book of Muslims. Islamic society then gradually needed to draw on written tradition. In addition, it intertwined education with religious studies. Mosques were the first centers where the Quran and later the Hadith were taught. Muhammad had said, "Everybody who enters mosque to learn or to educate others is doing jihad." It was Muhammad and later pious caliphs who conducted political and social affairs from the mosque. The structure of Iranian mosques in the first 2 centuries meant a successful experience where people were able to practice Islamic traditions in Sassanid architectural structures. Ivan and Gombat Khane are two of these Sassanid features. In the first place, the Ivan changed from a space of passage to a space for praying or for jalasot dars, that is, learning sessions. And in the second, Gombat Khane, either as a large square room or a series of continuous rooms, that is, Chartaqi, were used as a Shabistan facing the Qibla for the prayer or for giving religious sermons. Muslim needs for mosques in the territories, conquered territories, meant that many atashkade or fireplaces, Rostarian fireplaces, were transformed into mosques. Masjid Tarikh Khane in Damghan is a good example of these mosques. So as you see in this picture, it's the courtyard, and all these are Chartaqis, and the middle one is Taqahang. That is, and Tarikh Khane is one of the first Islamic schools and also one of the first in Iran, madrasa in Iran. Mosque in Iran. Tarikh Khane, that means the house of God, located to the southeast of Damghan, was constructed in the 9th century. It was built in a pre-Islamic Khorasani architectural structure which was common in the 11th century. The ceilings were without walls and supported only by cylinders, which are architecture in the style of the Sassanid dynasty. This type of mosque is called Chehel Sotun, or 40 columns, because of the concentration of its columns. The tall column and Chartaqi of Tarikh Khane Mosque were built in the style of Chartaqi, which illustrates Sassanid architecture. Focusing on the function of its holiness, Tarikh Khane continued its architecture form and structure. Places of worship in religion like Zoroastrianism and Islam were highly honored. By accepting the hypothesis that Tarikh Khane was originally a fireplace, it maintained its religious and social function as a place of worship. On the other hand, the sanctity of kings in the Iranian culture and their farah-e-izadi or divine splendor gave them special dignity. In many historic and literal sources, the word Khoda referred only to kings, with the hypothesis that Tarikhane Mosque has already been a Sassanid palace, and with the fact that mosques were usually built on prior sacred places, Tarikhane has consistently maintained its dignity. So, besides Tarikhane, we have two other mosques that are made in the first 2 centuries in Iran. One is Masjid of Nain, that you see it doesn't have any special place for education and is intended for prayer. And the other one is, okay. So we have these two for masjid in the first 2 centuries. From the 9th century, education changed from merely learning Quran to the spread of Islamic schools. The division of Islamic society into two groups of Sunnites, including Shafi'i, Hanafi, Maliki, and Hanbali, and the Shiite, such as Zaydis, Ismaili, and Imami, impacted educational and prayer spaces, including mosque. Mosque, particularly the Masjid Jame, that is called congregational mosque, turned into the center of these various ideas. The experience of the variety of thoughts on the one hand and the educating and spreading them into society on the other hand meant that fundamental change happened in the educational system. Education of these thoughts and attempts to establish them in society opposed to alternative ideas became one of the top priority functions of mosques. Masjid Jame of the 9th century are good examples of Masjid Madrasa. This new function affected the physical plan of the mosque to facilitate education through seminars, work groups, and lectures. From this time on, education influenced the architecture of mosques in two distinct ways. First, mosques became considerably larger and with broader spaces. Second, the single Iwan plan of mosques like Tariq Khane or Masjid Jame Atiq Shiraz and Naim became 4 Iwan mosques. These 4 Iwan provided a vast space for education. In this plan, it was easier for the lecturer to have eye contact with his audience and to hear what they said. Moreover, different schools of thought could have an Iwan for themselves. Masjid Jame Zaware is in Isfahan, is one example of this Masjid Madrasa that you see. There is a courtyard and there are 4 Iwans, and so there is some space for educational purposes. And the other is Masjid Jame Ardestan, again in Isfahan. That is one of the first 2-floor mosque, and because of that, it has also a good space for education. And then Masjid Jame Isfahan is thought to be the best example of these types of Masjid Madrasa, manifesting the beauty and Iranian architecture. It includes 20 different buildings. The mosque is a result of continual construction, reconstruction, additions, and renovations on the site from about the 8th to the end of the 20th century. There are hypotheses that this masjid had originally been Atashkade, so like the first Iranian mosque, it was built around a central courtyard surrounded by 4 Iwans. Construction under the Saljuqs included the addition of 2 brick Gombat Khane, for which the mosque is renowned. The South Dome was built to house the Mihrab by Nizamul, the famous vizier of the Saljuqs in 11th century, and was larger than any dome known as its time. The North Dome was constructed a year later by Tajul Mulk, Nizamul Mulk's rival. So it's interesting that this mosque has a kind of history behind that. It's not just a kind of masjid madrasa. It has a history of atashkari, and later it has changed to a very big mosque, masjid jami, and then masjid madrasa. And these two people that I refer to, Nizamul Mulk and Tajul Mulk, that were rivals, and they contributed to this mosque in making a good place that later were used, or even in that time was used for education. There are several theories as to the educational uses of mosque. Some scholars like Sauvager, that is the famous Orientalist, in his book La Mosque Umayyad du Madin, hypothesized that Masjid Jami, Ardestan, Qazvin, Ray, and Baghdad were basically madrasa. This theory seems unlikely for two reasons. The first is the absence of any other places in these cities which can be considered Masjid Jami, since this was a basic necessity of these cities. The second reason is that establishment of the madrasa was the result of a conflict between religious and educational affairs. So it is unlikely that these Masjid Jami or congregational mosques were madrasa. Hillerbrand, in Islamic architecture, on the other hand, has another theory. He believes that some masjid madrasas, such as the ones in Ardestan, Qazvin, Isfahan, and Baghdad, were basically madrasa, which were constructed within the mosque and were intended not to disturb any other functions of mosque. In this view, the school was conducted in two-floor rawaq, which were constructed around the courtyard and where students lived. Rooms which were built behind these two-floor rawaq supported this theory. Under Buids and Ghaznavid, besides mosques where public studies were conducted, other buildings were built that intended for more private studies. Some examples of these type of buildings were Maktab Khane. Primary education was done there, including reading the Quran and writing were taught there, and Darul Ilm or Darul Hikmah, that is a kind of library where private institution built by governor or ulama. These buildings, which were intended for particular people, did not have a large impact on the physical structure of educational centers. So we need to know a little about Khaneh-hay Khorasan. This is one example of Khaneh Khorasan in Bamiyan in Afghanistan. And as you see here, there is a courtyard and there are 4 Iwan that are ending to this courtyard, and also perhaps to the board, to the outside. In early 10th century, masjid madrasa were not able to fulfill the educational needs of the society. So the establishment of an independent educational institution became the necessity, and those were madrasa. Clashes of idea among different sects of Sunni and Shi'i were one of the main reasons for the establishment of madrasa. The Fatimid dynasty came to power in 10th century with their emphasis on Shiite ideas in Egypt. Al-Azhar was flourished in 970, and from its early beginnings changed from a mosque to a religious and political center of Fatimids. From their center in Al-Azhar, the Fatimids made many efforts to spread the Fatimid Shiite or the Seveners to the entire Islamic territories in Baghdad and also in Iran. Affected by these ideas, Ismaili, that is a Sevener Shiite group, developed in Iran and became established in the castles of central and eastern Iran. Iranian bureaucrats, especially Nizam-ul-Mulk, established Sunni Islam in Iran and Mesopotamia in opposition to the Fatimids as well as to the Shiite Buyids who ruled in Iran and Baghdad for over a century, and so dominated the Abbasid as the main center of Sunni Islam. Establishing educational centers which could compete with Al-Azhar was therefore uniquely significant. Under these conditions, Masjid Madrasa were no longer able to transmit these ideas. The contradictions between the religious and educational functions of Masjid Madrasa had developed problems in the proper use of the structures of the buildings. At that time, besides the conflict between the two sects of the Shiite and Sunnis, each had different schools which identified themselves as true Islam. Consequently, mosques were no longer proper places for these arguments, and disputes were in conflict with the peace and spiritualities of mosques. Masjid Madrasa attracted many students from other cities, even though they didn't have facilities for them to live. In addition, the Saljuqs' direct supervision over educational centers were not in line with the structure of mosques. They also controlled the development of the content of teaching materials and the independent position of madrasa. The teachers from Imam Jame or Imam Jum'eh, as which required a distinguished place for them. But these social changes required factors such as long-term social and political stability and the support of power from this movement. Sporadic activities were accomplished in the 9th and 10th centuries, but it was under the Saljuqs that comprehensive dynasty was developed in Iran and spread its power to Baghdad, where the Abbasid Caliph was stationed. This political stability provided the condition for powerful social changes under the guidance of great Iranian Wazir, Haji Nizam-ul-Mulk, that was the Wazir of Al-Barsalan and Malik Shah in 11th century. The strong Seljuk Wazir marked a turning point in the relatively long period of his wazirate. The establishment of Nizamiah was the most significant educational development in Islamic medieval history. These madrasas were formal governmental schools in Sunni Islamic territories, which represented an independent educational center. By establishing governmental schools in the form of Nizamiah, Nizam-ul-Mulk achieved fundamental changes in the viewpoint of education. The expenses of these schools were listed in governmental budgets, and the schools advertised and taught official religious beliefs. Nizamiye were consciously built in the large cities of the Seljuks, which highlights their significant role within the political structure of the Seljuks. Nizamiye were principally built at the center of provinces to attract students from smaller cities. The point that about 30,000 people audited Muhammad Ghazali's lecture may be exaggerated. However, it does point to the vastness of these buildings. The large number of Nizamiye which were established in relatively short period of time in cities of Iran illustrate that they were constructed based on a shared plan. This standard plan was intended by Nizam-ul-Mulk to provide a single political religious result. It supports the theory that these schools were built with a uniform structure to provide a common picture of Sunni madrasa in contrast to the Shiite center of education. Nizamiye initiated the project to have a residence and dining hall for a student. It was based on the idea to provide welfare for the students so they could focus their attention on achieving their education. Therefore, the plan of madrasa changed from a building similar to the mosque to a building like Karvansara. So, because we have no special plan of Nizamiye, we can go through Karvansaray or Robat to learn a little about the structure of Nizamiah. And it's because there is some places for living and residents in Karvansaray, the Nizamiah tried to draw on this kind of architecture in order to have a place for students to live or for their, some place for their dining hall. And yes. So based on their Waqfnameh, Nizamiah were dedicated to Shafi'is and had specific staff members such as mutawalli or trustees, supervisors or nazir, librarians, khazanul maktaba, and doorman bowwab. Teachers were employed after going through a very strict process of application and were required to have permission to teach. Teachers or ustad put on a specific clothes called tarhe and sat on specific chairs. During the teaching, two teacher assistants were called mu'id, stood by the ustad and repeated what he said. In his absence, Naib taught the lesson. The library of the madrasa provided ustad and students with their required books. According to Hafiz Abru in Zubdat al-Tawarikh, on one occasion, Al-Barsaran arrived at Neyshabur. Some faqih stood by the mosque. The Sultan asked, "Who are they?" Nizamul Mulk said, "They are ulama who are the best of people, since they have left the mortal world to gain virtues and perfection of the soul." The Sultan was impressed. Nizamul Mulk offered to build a place for this group of people in each city and designate fellowship to them, so they could spend their time on education and prayer for the continuity of the Sultan's reign. The Sultan approved the plan, so Nizamul Mulk wrote orders to build schools in other cities. It is believed that 70 schools were built with the Sultan's wealth. According to Zubdat al-Tawarikh, Nizamul Mulk was the first person who founded this tradition. According to Sobki in Tabaqat al-Shafiyat, Nizamul Mulk had built Nizamiah in every city of Iraq and Khorasan. Hindu Shah Nakhjavani in Tabaqat Salaf mentions that Khajeh built Madrasa in Baghdad, Basra, Isfahan, Herat, Rome. Sobki is the only biographer who, or Tazkir Navis, who refers to Nizamiah in 9 cities of Baghdad, Balkh, Neyshabur, Isfahan, Basra, Marv, Amol, Tabaristan, Mosul, and Herat. But there seems to be more schools, and there are some evidence, fortunately, in the last few years that there were more schools in other cities. And archaeology helped a lot to find this information. Now let's examine some of the main Nizamiah. The first is Nizamiah of Neyshabur, that is in Khorasan. With respect to the number of mudarris, fuqaha, and or jurists and students, Nizamiah of Neyshabur was the second Nizamiah after Nizamiah of Baghdad. Sources do not cite when it was built. However, based on historical evidence, it was evidently built before Nizamiah of Baghdad and during the reign of Al-Barsalan. During this time, with the murder of Amidul Mulk, the first Wazir of Al-Barsalan, who believed in Hanafi Islam, the Shafi'i Islam supported by Nizamul Mulk flourished. He invited prominent Shafi'i ulama like Imam al-Haramain Juwayni, Imam Muhammad Ghazali, and Imam Muhammad Yahya Neyshaburi to Neyshabur and assigned them to teaching and trusteeship. Very little is known about the architectural feature of this madrasa. Ibn Asir and Sobki only mentions that Abul Hasan Hersi, the famous student and assistant of Imam al-Haramain Juwayni, was Kasirul Lan, that means was cursing a lot, and while going up the stairs of madrasa, he cursed Satan, Shaitan, 70 times on each of the 70 stairs. So it illustrates that the madrasa was similar to large congress halls. But why was the Nizamiah of Nishabur not as famous as Baghdad's? Many reasons have been suggested. First, Nizamul Mulk paid more attention to Madrasa of Baghdad to highlight it against Al-Azhar, which was the main Shi'i madrasa in that time in Egypt. So he wanted to focus on that to rise Nizamiah of Baghdad against Al-Azhar. Second, the devastating invasions of Ghoz and then the Mongols of Nishabur destroyed these schools. Although Mongols' invasion of Baghdad was not as devastating as the one of Nishabur. In addition, Baghdad and its famous schools like Nizamiah and Mustansiriyeh flourished again under Ata Malik Juwaini, the governor of Baghdad after during the Mongols. So it seems that it kept its good days after Mongols. Nizamiah of Baghdad, as we talked, is the most significant madrasa of Nizamiah, which was established in 1066. So, as you see, here is Nizamiah and Mustansiriyeh, another school that was built in late Abbasid, and all these are bazaar markets, and it's also the tigress. So, according to Muntazam by Ibn Jawzi, it was built in the eastern part of Baghdad on the bank of the Tigris and in the bazaar near the gate Babul Zad, next to Madrasa Marjan. After the establishment of Nizamiah in Baghdad and with the use of its standard pattern, other schools were constructed in Balkh, Ray, Isfahan, Basra, and Khargerd. Nizamiah of Baghdad was established on the bank of Tigris River and in the bazaar of Baghdad. The construction of Madrasa cost 60,000 dinars, and Khaja dedicated annually 15,000 dinar for the expenses of students. Several buildings, including a bathhouse and shops, were constructed around the school. Many of these shops and properties of bazaar were bought to pay for the expenses of schools. Historical resources such as Al-Kamil fi Tarikh by Ibn Asir emphasize the beauties of the brickworks as well as the tile decorations of the Ivan of Nizamiah. Ibn Jubayr Andalusi in his book and also in his Rihlat, in that he visited the mosque in late 12th century, mentioned that it had been reconstructed and was the most beautiful among the 30 schools of Baghdad in that time. Even Ibn Battuta, who visited the madrasa, he visited there in mid 14th century, and he described it as a uniquely prominent building in the Islamic world. It includes vast spaces, large events for the residents of fuqaha and ulama. The mosque stand for muazzin, a library, and storage for food and other necessities. According to Al-Muntazam, most settled areas and eastern houses of Baghdad on the bank of the Tigris in the district known as Mushra'atul Zawaya and Darbur Zafarani were destroyed. Even though Nizamul Mulk spent a great deal of money to purchase these properties, according to Bidayat wa Nihaya by Ibn Asir, their owners reluctantly sold their properties, and because of that, one of the teachers, Sheikhul Ishaq Shirazi, the Ustad of the Madrasa, at first refused to teach at this school. Based on Wafiyatul Ayan, Ibn Khalakan, when Imam Muhammad Ghazali arrived at the madrasa for the first time, about 30,000 People crowded into the building, including the courtyard, rawaq, stall, and roofs, so that illustrates the fact that it must have been an extremely large building. Saadi was one of the most prominent Tullab in the Nizamiah of Baghdad. So I think that you know Saadi. There is no need that I refer to him. The next Nizamiah that we talk about is Nizamiah of Isfahan. This school is called Sadriye because of the title of Khojandi family, named Sadruddin, who taught there. After them, it was called Sadriye. It is not known when it was built, but based on the Kitabul Mahasin Isfahan Mafruhi, it must have been built between 1037 and 1093. Dardash, where Nizamiah was stood, was one of the main districts of Isfahan settled by Shafi'i under Saljuqs. Nizamul Mulk ordered the madrasa to be built next to Jame for Shafi'i Fuqaha, and Muhammad ibn Sabit Khojandi was one of the main mudarris of this madrasa. In another book, Hussein ibn Muhammad, that is the translator of Mahasin Isfahan, described Nizamiah in this way. Khaja established the Nizamiah of Isfahan near the great Jame in the district Dardasht as the best structure with the best features and material available and in the best location. At the entrance, there is a giant tall minaret like a tower touching the sky. 3 people can go up into the minaret through the spiral base, and they can't even see each other as long as they haven't reached its kongere, or the top of the minaret. A lot of money has been spent on it, and a lot of land or ziyah have been dedicated or waqf to this madrasa, which costs over 10,000 dinars. Yet now they are owned by Mustalike, that is freeloaders. So it means that in the time that he's talking about is not as flourished as it was before. And the last Nizamiah that we talk about is Nizamiah of Khargerd, that is in Khorasan. It's a vast area near Nishabur in Khorasan. It consists of 200 villages and 3 cities, including Sanjan and Khargerd. Abul Muzaffar Khafi was one of the main ulama of this city. The ruins of the Saljuq building in Khargerd is most likely a madrasa, so it is the only remnant of the Nizamiya madrasa. There is an inscription that you see here, which attributes this building to Khaja Nizamul Mulk, which illustrates that it was built in the time of this wazir. As one can see from this plan, it has been a square courtyard and 4 Ivans. So it's a courtyard, Ivans, and all these are windows. So it shows that it can't be a mosque, and it's mostly a madrasa. Now let's take a look at the distribution of Nizamiya in some parts of Iran and in the map that I am working on, and also with Dr. Elahe Khairandis be working on to find these Nizamiya and other schools in different parts of Iran and Baghdad during the Saljuqs. So first we go through Greater Khorasan. In Sabzevar, we have Madrasa Kuye Sayyar that was built by Imam Hussein in Bayhaq. And in Bayhaq we have a lot of different schools. So I refer just to some of these schools. In Mar we have Madrasa Imaduddin, also Samani. In Nishabur we have Madrasa Khatun Mahd Iraq, that all are referred to by historical books like Al-Kamil fi Tarikh or Tarikh Bayhaq. And for this one that I said, Khatun Mahd Iraq, it's said that Tarikh Bayhaqi, written by Abul Fazl Bayhaqi, that had 3 volumes, and some of these volumes were kept in Kitabkhane Saraqs, and some others were kept in Kitabkhane Khatun Mahd Iraq, that is in Neyshabur. And then we have Tus, Madrasa Ghazali, one of the most famous schools, that according to Ghazali Name by Jalaluddin Humayi, Abu Hamid Ghazali, after leaving Baghdad and after leaving teaching in Nizamiah of Baghdad, he returned to his hometown in Tus and built a madrasa and khanqah near his house. And it's very interesting to know about the relationship between madrasa and khanqah, that was another educational center. And then we have Isfahan, one of the main centers that had different kinds of schools. And one of them is, for example, Madrasa Fakhriye, that built by Fakhrul Mulk, Nizamul Mulk's son, and also Malik Khatun, that is one of the main madrasa of Isfahan, and it's mentioned in, it's described by Rawandi, Rahatul Sudur Rawandi. Also we have Madrasa Semiromi, that was the Wazir of Saljuqs. And Ray, Madrasa Tajuddin, that it was the place of Fuqaha, Zuhad, Sadat in order to read Quran. So it shows that there were different groups of scholars, not just ulama, that studied in this school. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and then we have other schools like, I don't want to go through them, I skipped them, but the last one that I want to refer to is in Yazd, 2-minaret madrasa, that was built by Abu Ja'far in 1111. It had 2 minaret, and it's interesting that like Munar Jumban in Isfahan, the minarets were shaking. And it's one of the first schools that shaking minaret. And he was buried in the Gumbad Khane of this school, the builder, the founder of this school. And then we have Baghdad, Madrasa Abu Hanife, that was dedicated to Hanafi Islam. Also Madrasa Tajiye, that was built by Tajul Mulk, Nizamul Mulk's rival, and Azizuddin, that this school was for orphans. And it's interesting that some schools are just for children, and some schools, for example, this one for orphans. So, and Kamaliye, that was built for Shafis. And yeah. So yeah, I'm still working on sources to find more madrasa and their features if they are described. So, and this is 2-minaret madrasa in Tabas in Yazd that I talked about. To sum up, a historical study of madrasa as one of the main social buildings opens a window onto the darker aspects of medieval history. The Saljuqs, as a main actor in this chapter of medieval history, made dramatic changes in the structure and function of architecture. The establishment of the Nizamiah was a critical change in educational space. The emphasis of Islam on education, with intertwined educational and prayer centers, gradually led to the development of the Masjid Madrasa. The establishment of the Nizamiah in multiple cities of Iran and Iraq became the age of governmental madrasa. Iranian pre-Islamic elements of both Ivan and Gumbad were used in the structure of masjid. masjid madrasa and especially madrasa in order to provide a unique place for education. The more complete structures of these features were later used in the Nizamiah, and these became the basis of other madrasa in later times. Thank you.